Hello and welcome. My name is Richard Bottery and welcome to this latest food and drink webinar. We're really pleased that you could spare some time in the day to join us. So for those of you who are watching today, I just want to explain a little bit about the format. I'm joined here by my guest, Duco Del Gorge, who's going to introduce himself properly in due course. But the short summary is what he doesn't know about the food and drink market in Japan is not worth knowing. Duco, why don't you tell us a little bit more about your history here?
Thank you very much, Richard. Hello. So I've spent altogether about 23 years in Japan. I came here the first time between 88 and 92 with Unilever in a marketing role. I went back to England for a few years and then I came back again in 1995 with a Belgian food ingredients company called Puratos as the general manager for the Japanese subsidiary. And I did that through till the end of 2007, let's say. So it was about 13 years. And anyway, and then I started up the company I'm doing now, Mia Project. I established actually about 9 years ago. And the point being to bring exceptional food to Japan. We call it exceptional food for thinking people. It's mainly organic. We have some brands from England. I've been doing that. Apart from that, I should also mention I have been linked with various chambers of commerce and also the European Business Council to try and make Japan a little bit more accessible and easier to deal with for exporters and importers alike.
Great, thank you. So Duco's seen the industry from lots of different angles, but at the moment is at the sharp end of actually importing goods from overseas. So without further ado, let's hand over to Duco and his presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Richard. Okay, so perhaps the first thing I should mention on the cover slide, the title I came up with was Exporting Food to Japan, What You Need to Know. And I can only hope that by the end of the presentation, you will have discovered mostly what you need to know to help you decide if you want to export food to Japan, and then if you do, if you think it is the right market for you, what you need to know to hopefully be successful. I just realized that, you know, the pictures on the front, obviously these are not products which we are importing. I tried to put a representation of some of the brands that I've seen in Japan, some of them very widely available, like Walker's, and others which are more perhaps niche brands, but in any case doing very well in different ways. And I will mention that the one in the middle, Clipper Tea, is one of the brands that we've been importing for quite a few years now and is thankfully doing quite well. Okay. And two images of Japan, which I think also kind of say a lot. Of course, you've got the how should I describe it? The beautiful, you know, Fujisan, Mount Fuji, which is so closely associated with Japan, and who anyone in Japan would like to try and climb at some point in their life, and maybe we can link that to our hope of climbing the mountain of, you know, succeeding in Japan. And then you've got a picture of the famous Shibuya crossing, which happens to be about 5 minutes from where my office is and also from where I live. And it's a great place to be, Shibuya. It's really where it's all happening. And every time I walk past all these people, I think it should be possible to be very successful in Japan because there's a lot of people here. Okay, so first of all, maybe I don't need to tell you because apparently there's quite a lot of you watching this webinar. Why does Japan matter? Part of the reason that is a title is because the time I spent at the European Business Council, we did spend quite a lot of our time trying to convince everyone in Europe why Japan still mattered, because everyone was rushing to China, rushing to various other markets, and seemed to be giving up on Japan. So part of my job then, and what I still feel quite strongly about now, is that Japan does matter. It's the third largest economy in the world still. What makes it also very interesting is that it's a very concentrated market. And I'll mention one relevant point there, which is that whereas in the United States, people see it as a huge market and they need to have perhaps different importers, one on the west, one on the east, etc. Japan 127 million people, but it is really in a very, very, sort of concentrated area, especially Tokyo and the surrounding Kanto region, Osaka and Kobe, and the Kansai region already takes in a lot of people, and then various other large cities, together already got a large part of the market. So it means you can access and get to a lot of the population in a very effective way. It's a very disciplined market, and that makes it a very nice place to work, and it means that you can be certain about quite a few things, and as that's a big strong point. It has a very skilled industrious pool of talent, so once you're here, it's easy to find people who are prepared to work very hard. The customers are very loyal, so that can work against you for the first number of years, of course, when you're here with a new brand, because obviously you have to take people away from their other brands. But if you have the right product with the right selling points, once you get your customers, it's rather difficult to lose them. So they are very loyal, and they will not switch very easily. And what makes Japan in that sense quite different from many other markets, that especially I'm thinking now of the UK, obviously, where when I visit Sainsbury or Tesco or the various supermarkets I've, especially recently, compared with 10, 20 years ago, and it's 2 for 1, 3 for 1, and all these incredible offers all the time. You won't see that in Japan, because basically that kind of price promotion, and very heavy price promotion, is not used in Japan to switch shoppers, and I think they will not switch that easily. So that's a very strong point. So the customs law, it's a global quality leader. That is a very important message to you as an exporter, because first of all, please make sure that your quality is meeting the needs of the Japanese market, and I cannot overstress that point. But equally, the best way you can perceive that point is to say, right, I'm going to make my products meet the needs of the Japanese market, because then I will be a leader everywhere in the world. And if I can succeed in Japan, I can succeed anywhere. And that's the sort of attitude which separates those who will succeed in Japan from those who sometimes give up. It is a gateway to Asia still. Foodex, a big exhibition which takes place in March, at the beginning of March of each year. Many of the visitors who come there are from other Asian countries looking to see what is successful in Japan, and they will obviously come to Foodex. They will also then look at the market and see what's selling and what's successful. So that is a very another big point. The final point, there is a potential for substantial and sustained profits, but I think I need to qualify that statement by saying another thing that I felt since long ago in Japan. There is a very fine line between making a lot of money in Japan and losing a lot of money in Japan. And there are plenty of examples like that. If you get a few things wrong, if you take huge gambles, if you don't do your preparation, you can lose a lot of time and a lot of money. On the other hand, if you play the long term and if you prepare yourself properly and do the right things, then you can get substantial and sustained profits. So it can cut both ways. Some challenges in Japan. The first one I have to mention now because it's on the top of everyone's mind. The yen is now very weak, and it looks like it could go further still. If we talk about the pound, which is the most obvious currency to talk about it in this particular webinar, then we're now at the latest I looked, I think it was about 186. Even in my time in Japan, I remember it was at 230. Yeah. So, there's no reason why it can't go even weaker. I would use that as a positive point for anyone looking at Japan now, because please consider your price point, how successful you will be at 210, 220, 230 yen to the pound. Then you can be sure you can be successful. A lot of companies make the mistake of entering the market when, let's say, the yen is strong and their own currency relatively weak, think, oh, this is good, I can make it work. And then they're surprised when it goes the wrong way, and then they discover that their product is not competitive. And then they pull out of the market. That's not something you want to find yourself in that position. So I would say, although that's a challenge, turn that challenge to your advantage and make sure that you can be competitive at the current rate or even a bit weaker. The economic malaise, don't expect any good news for a while coming out of Japan. Abenomics is not the answer to all the problems of Japan, certainly not the way it's panning out. So just expect that we're going to have the current situation for quite a long time. The good news is, even though Japan is facing difficulties, what everyone tells me, and it's true, if you walk around the streets of Japan, you don't see the sort of scenario that you may see, and I'm not going to pick out any particular countries at this point, but you know what you do see in many other countries in Europe or in other parts of the world where it's really hurting people. So hopefully it will stay in that way. Yes, people are going to be a little bit more careful to spend their money, but they will still spend it for the right things. The other challenge, it's a conservative market. Again, play that to your advantage. Do things differently. You'll stand out. But it is a conservative market. You will find difficulties changing things. The trade barriers, to throw that in as a one-liner is kind of seriously understating what is still one of the biggest challenges for any importer, such as ourselves, and for any exporter. And sorry to say, I'm going to leave it at that, except to say that you're going to have problems with perhaps additives, with contamination in production, where suddenly something will be in the product which shouldn't be there. It could be in weights or other things, although I haven't, in different weight tolerances between Japan and others, although thankfully that hasn't come out as a big issue. And the big one, which I haven't mentioned yet, import duties. So, which hurts a lot of food and makes it seriously, unfortunately, in some cases non-competitive and not affordable for Japanese. So trade barriers is a big issue. Local competition needs to be obviously taken into account, but the more, and sorry for the spelling, competition. Anyway, it's competition. And thankfully, though, in many cases, the local competition, it's food which is different from what is coming out of the UK. So hopefully it's not such a big issue. But if there are similar products in Japan, you need to keep that into account. Quality paranoia. I've mentioned it already. Can't say enough about it. The Japanese are very quality conscious. Even the Japanese say they are too paranoid about quality and they're too difficult, but they will find problems in your products which no one else in the world will find. Please keep that in mind. And that's true about the product itself, consistency, about the way the packaging looks, etc. Japanese buying behavior. The Japanese will look at things in much more detail. They will read the label very carefully. They will want to know more about the product than perhaps any other consumer in the world. And then finally, food trends. They can be wonderful if you're on a riding food trend. At the moment, it's coconut oil. Granola is another big trend at the moment. In the past, it was Belgian waffles, or it was tiramisu. It's a little bit of acai. So anyway, there are a lot of these trends that come along. It's wonderful if you're part of that, and if you're benefiting from that. However, there is a big warning attached, because the trend can suddenly go south, and there are plenty of examples of companies who are left sitting on stock when they thought the trend would continue, and it didn't. So those are some challenges. Food distribution in Japan. I've seen quite a few charts which are supposed to explain the percentage of food that is distributed through various channels, and I've never understood any of them. I've never agreed with any of them, so I decided for the sake of this webinar to make up my own. So this is, please look at these figures with a degree of caution, but this is based on my experience, and it's intended to give you an impression. And on the left side, we've got the percentage of packaged food market, and on the right side, which is the most relevant for our company, and I would guess for many of you who are looking at this, the percentage of quality imported foods. So premium, and I will tend to focus my comments now more on the right hand side, and you can see for yourselves what's on the left hand side. Premium supermarkets are a very important part of the Japanese market, although you see it's supposedly only about 10% is my guess, perhaps, but very important for imported foods. And there are a lot of different premium supermarkets. I'll mention a few now. You've got was always best known in the past, Kinokuniya, but you've got Kinokuniya, Seijo Ishii, Ikari Super in Kansai, Queen's Isetan, Peacock Store, etc., etc. I could rattle off. There are perhaps 20 or 30 chains, at least, that I can think of, and some of them are more regional, and you discover them one by one as you go into this market. And these are supermarkets that want to carry imported products, and that's an important part of how they differentiate themselves from the mainstream supermarkets. So that's an area you definitely want to be in. Internet and mobile internet is becoming hugely important in Japan, and they've got one of the most, no, not one of the most, I would say arguably the best transport system you could find in the world, that you order the product today. Amazon even says same-day delivery. But okay, if you're unlucky, you have to wait one day for your product, unless, of course, you're in Hokkaido or Kyushu, when it might take a couple of days. So that is huge, it's growing, and you definitely want to be in that part of the market. Catalogue delivery is perhaps a little bit more unique in Japan, but okay, it's a similar concept. You've got the catalogues, you read from it, and then you get the orders. And there are specific catalogues for different market segments as well, be it gifting, be it, in our case, organic, etc. Specialty stores can be a whole raft of different kind of stores. Lifestyle, gourmet, like Dean and DeLuca, various other kinds of specialty. They also, in some cases, the lifestyle stores especially getting more and more into foods. That's an area we think is very important. Department stores play a role in that all department stores have a very important food section at the bottom. It's quite famous in Japan. You go there and you're just blown away by the amount of food, the quality of food that's available. So it's a nice place to be. It will not be an area that you get a lot of sales, but it's a good place to be present, so that people see your products there, if you have that kind of product. GMS, so that's the big, what do we call it, the upscale, the multiples, the large-scale supermarkets. So in Japan, you're talking about Aeon, Ito-Yokado, Jusco, Daiei, etc., Seiyu. In most cases, they tend to have mainly Japanese products, and you'll see relatively few imported products. So although they're very important for the whole food market, it's an area that you want to approach with caution if you have imported products. And that's even more the case for convenience stores. Convenience stores are famous in Japan. There's about 50,000 of them. They're everywhere. You can do everything there. But it's an incredibly high-risk area to be in. And in many cases, you would not be able to supply them. If you suddenly have 13,000, 14,000 7-Elevens wanting your product, A, could you supply them? And B, if it stops suddenly on a dime, you're left sitting on a lot of stock. So there's a lot of sob stories, a lot of companies that have gone bankrupt trying to supply the convenience store market, so approach with caution. Discount stores are still relatively unimportant in Japan, but obviously an area to keep an eye on. And then there's the whole area of food service, cafes, restaurants, hotels. Okay, I hope that has helped to give a bit of a picture on the distribution side. Let's now talk about some of the options that you would face when you're saying, okay, we want to now export to Japan. And there are, from my mind, various sort of clear, distinct options that you have. One is, will we create a local subsidiary in Japan? And the answer I can give you on that is, if you have huge potential and if you have deep pockets, then that is the way you probably want to go. But you want to be absolutely sure about those two fundamental points. I would say that a kind of a minimum threshold sales level that you should be considering to get in Japan to justify that as an absolute minimum, in my opinion, is about 1 billion yen sales local. If you can see yourselves getting to 1 billion yen and more, then you may want to consider a local subsidiary. If you think that's going to be a bit difficult, then probably it's not the way to go. Exclusive importer is the way most people go. You find a local importer who is very well established. They can be big, they can be small. I don't think size is the most important factor. What is important is that they have the resources that can handle your brand and that they will be focused on it. And that's where you want to go, and I'll talk more about that later. Multiple importers I would not recommend. It can sometimes work, and that's where you want to compare and compete to importers. There are very few examples of it in Japan. It has ended up in court cases, in one example I can think of. And the danger, of course, is that both importers think, well, I may lose it, or if I sell it, the other one's going to come in and try and sell it cheaper, etc., etc. And the point I want to come back to on this is what I said before. Japan is a very big market in terms of the size of value, but it's a very concentrated market. And I have personally been in the situation where an exporter went to another importer, and within days, if not weeks, I've got the retailer telling me, oh, I've got this product now through another importer. And the point is, the products we're talking about, they're going to go to the same places, to the premium supermarkets, to the specialty stores, and so within a very short time, you're going to be crossing paths. So it's I would say, generally speaking, not a very good way to go. And finally, one option I would recommend to some of you is, if you want quick results, first point. Second point, which is not mentioned on the slide, but if you go through your costing exercise and you say, hang on a sec, by the time I've costed my product, the ex-works price, the distribution, if it has to go in a reefer container, and I'll be talking about this later, if the import duty is high and the final price going through the normal channel is so high that it's going to have a very limited market potential, then you may want to go direct to a few food retailers, like Seijuishi is very well known to want to import direct. Caldi is another one who wants to import direct. There are a few food retailers out there who want to import direct. And you may be better off saying, that's what we're going to do. We're going to go to one or two of those direct. You get good business. The downside, of course, is you could lose it suddenly. But it's something to keep in mind. Okay. Why do many foreign food and drink products fail in Japan? I'm obviously not going to read through this list. I'll let you read through it. But let's just say that there are a huge number of hurdles, there are a huge number of potholes, whatever you want to call them, that you can go wrong in. And a lot of companies do go wrong in a number of these areas. And hopefully you'll not be like the animal on the right, whatever it was, when it was somehow run over by the double yellow lines. But in any case, please don't underestimate what can go wrong in Japan, because an awful lot of things can go wrong. A few points that I sort of come up with here is, on the product side, the obvious ones. If the taste, it can be wonderful in England, but if it is, for whatever reason, it might be too sweet for Japan, the texture may be wrong, the size may be wrong, the ingredients, whatever, those are things to look at. Batch to batch consistency, contamination, foreign bodies, those may all sound obvious, and I'm sure all of you, most of you, have gotten all the necessary quality controls to meet the local market, let alone Japan. But nevertheless, please understand Japan is that level higher. I mention their leakage because if you have a liquid product, and I'm thinking in particular oil-based products, we and a lot of other importers have had the issue that if the lid is not on as tight as it could or should be, somehow the oil, and oil has a great way of finding its way through things, that's what it's designed for in some cases, that it comes out, and believe me, that's caused a lot of headaches for us and a lot of other companies. Shelf life. You can't talk about food in Japan or anywhere without talking about shelf life, and in Japan it's especially important. Many retailers demand a minimum of either 50% or, if you're lucky, 1/3 remaining shelf life. If you have less than 12 months shelf life and the product's not produced on a regular basis, you may find that by the time you've imported it, you've only got a window of 1 or 2 months in which you can distribute it, and you run into problems, and then you're left sitting on a lot of product as an importer, which you have to then discount or find other homes for. So shelf life, please consider very strongly. The wrong packaging, appearance, design, shape, material, opening, closing. If you have something that has to be opened and can't be used in one go, make sure it's resealable. Sounds obvious, but I have seen products which are not like that. The wrong logistics, if you do infrequent production or if there's a very long planning time, that can cause a huge problem and make your product also not viable for the Japanese market. And then, of course, wrong pricing. The product can be wrongly priced, first of all and most obviously, if it's too expensive at the Ex Works level, and that can be either because your ingredients are too expensive or because you have an what's the word I'm thinking of? If you're expecting too much profit from your export business. Beyond that, if it has to go in a reefer, that's going to already make it even more, in a reefer container, that's going to make it even more likely that it's going to be uncompetitive. And then if you've got a high import duty, the higher the import duty, and it can be 20%, 30%, then again it's going to make it more likely that it's going to be too expensive. Lessons learned. What have I learned in 23 years dealing with imported food in Japan? First of all, we're going to be much more careful at choosing suppliers. The obvious things of exceptional taste, quality and other benefits will always be there. More and more we'll be looking for products with at least 1 year shelf life, and of course we're very happy if a product has 2 or 3 years shelf life. My favorite product is vinegar, because it has at least 10 years shelf life, and actually it has an indefinite shelf life. Unfortunately, although we'd love to sell a lot more vinegar, that's not always easy. Maximum, I'm putting in some specifics here to make life hopefully easier for you. I've come up with a figure of maximum 3 weeks lead time from the time we order to the time that you're able to dispatch. 2 weeks is even better, of course, but really any more than 3 weeks it starts to become very tricky to plan out. In the end, that's going to be 2.5, 3 months ahead that you have to plan. Not very easy. Competitively priced, I've talked about, and committed to succeed in Japan come what may. Please, anyone who says, well, it works here in England, that's fine, it's not going to work in Japan. Need to be committed to meet the Japanese market. Exclusivity is important, and then with exclusivity, collaboration and control. If the local company is a really big company and they say, this is our strategy, that's how we want to do it in Japan, there is the risk of that going wrong, and there's a lot of examples of that. Small initial order, no matter how confident you are, the first order we make sure is just 10 or 20 cases. Bring it in. You can have surprises at Japanese customs. We've had them, others have had them. You don't want to have a surprise with a 40-foot container. Okay, drinks. There are frequent analyses on drinks. So drinks are more challenging than others. They will do lots of analyses and make sure that microbiologically, etc., that it's okay. So that's for drinks. Avoiding changes without notice. We too often we discover the product in the warehouse. Oh, what happened? The packaging's changed, the recipe's changed, something's changed. And then we have to remind the suppliers to tell us. Thankfully, a lot of them do tell us, but not always. I have to mention quality on every slide, so that's why it's there. And thorough preparation. Okay, and if we talk about thorough preparation, make sure, please, that your objectives are matching the objectives of the importer. Be realistic and just make sure that you're saying, okay, this is what we expect in the first year and the second year. There's always going to be some level of understanding as long as the exporter sees that the importer is trying hard. But make sure that those are matching. As far as possible, matching philosophy. Make sure who decides the local strategy. And ideally it should not be 100% the importer, but it cannot be too much the exporter. There should be a balance between the two. There you go, quality control. Minimum order quantity, check that carefully and make sure it's realistic. Minimum pallet quantities can be a challenge sometimes for some products in the beginning. The lead time, production frequency, if it is going to be 1 year shelf life, minimum once per month production. Check the Ex Works price, those things I've covered, so I'll just run through the rest of those. A subject that sometimes comes up, sorry, I was going to talk about marketing funds, but before that, Japanese food regulations. Please, please, please study them. You can find an English version of the Japanese food regulations. please look at them for your category, understand exactly what is and isn't allowed, get to understand that. And then marketing funds is something that's offered by some suppliers. Just all I would say is make sure that that's fully understood and how that works. Choosing the right importer for you. Please consider someone who is firmly established, ideally not too young. But having said that, if everyone used this for us 10 years ago, we wouldn't have a business now. So we were very lucky that people somehow believed in us when we were only just starting and when you're old, and sometimes it can work out. But as far as possible, make sure that either they're firmly established or that the person or company who's doing it has the right credentials to be likely to succeed. Check as far as possible that they have a good distribution base, that they have a passion. If those two first things are missing, they have to have the passion for your food, for your particular product. That they're going to be focused, communication, and that's both communication between the importer and you, which is the one I'm actually especially considering now, but also how they will communicate with the market, and then alignment. Some potential exporting issues, disclosure of formulation and product procedure. Please be aware you're going to need to give away your formulation and your product procedure. That can be a stumbling block for a lot of companies, but you need it for customs, and basically you can trust Japan, trust customs, and you're going to need to do it, otherwise you won't get the product into the country. Quality certificates, the food regulations I've talked about, additives, ingredients, labeling, allergens are three issues that come to mind. Analyses, there will be all kinds of analyses for drinks, for flaxseed, they'll check on cyanide, for peanuts, aflatoxins, etc. Defective goods, please consider that. Defective goods, try and make sure they're not defective before they get on the ship, and then you're going to have the problem that damage will happen during transport. That is an issue. And basically I would say make sure there's some allowance for it, and that you will have to consider compensating the importer for that. Claims, make sure they're followed up quickly and properly, and that you get good replies that the importer can give back to their customers, and long lead times. I'm nearing the end because I want to give a little bit of time for Q&A, and I realise I've gone a little bit over the target time, so I'll try and get through the last slide or two now in the remaining time. What is the dream product for us as an importer, and for any importer therefore, because I'm not talking about us, because actually at the moment we're not looking for any new exporters, suppliers. First of all, brand leaders are wonderful, but if they're not brand leaders, obviously not everyone can be a brand leader. Strong, unique selling points, really unique, stand out, a story to tell. As far as possible, a competitive price, but we're realistic on that. But anyway, it can't be way out the price. Quality control has to be there. Greater than 1 year shelf life, less than 10% import duty ideally, produce minimum monthly, maximum 2 weeks lead time. So before I talked about 3 weeks, but the best products for us are maximum 2 weeks lead time. And ideally that they've already dealt with, I've put 20 export markets, that you're used to dealing with export markets, so that you know what needs to be done to export to Japan. And that you consider Japan, you want to be here, you want to be successful, and you're prepared to do the extra mile to do that. I think that brings me a little bit over the time to the end. So, you know, having done all of the study, everything, are you ready to export to Japan or not? Hopefully yes, and hopefully you can make it successful. Thank you very much.
Duca, fantastic. I mean, that's such a comprehensive overview, and I think although we had such a large selection of questions, it's hopefully covered quite a bit of the material already, but it's great that we do have an opportunity to solicit some more. Okay, so let me start at the top level. You hinted or mentioned that Japan is economically not in a great place at the moment. But before we go on the broadcast, we also talked about a little bit more subtlety to that. There's demographic change going on in Japan. Could you just explain to us, I mean, you're in this market, you believe in it. Why is there an opportunity for people?
Well, the opportunities are there for a number of reasons. I mean, first of all, you're talking about 127 million people, so that's a huge market. And although there's all kinds of predictions, some of which suggest the population could go to zero if you keep following trends, which obviously is not going to happen, it'll take time, and there's a lot of people. And within that population, there's a lot of growing needs, a lot of growing sectors, and the challenge is to find those. One obvious one is the aging sector, and that's talked about so often. You know, what will the aging people need? What kind of food products would be appealing for them? So that's one area. And then health, the area we're in, obviously organic, health, ethical foods. There are those kind of growth opportunities within this very large, seemingly static market.
And setting aside the sort of boom areas, you mentioned that there are some that kind of on an ephemeral basis can suddenly be really hot and then kind of fall away. Thinking about these more core issues, like you mentioned, health, lifestyle related ones, where do you see the nexus between that and strength in the UK?
Well, I would say one definite area is this whole area of health, ethics, and that kind of part of it is one. Another one, which is a global trend and which seems to be endless, is the whole area of convenience, and I think the UK has a lot to offer there. And for me, one of the other big strengths that UK food companies have is in the whole area of design and design, lifestyle, but you know, seeing the products which are shown on this particular slide, and you know, I would say one of the weaknesses in Japanese food, and it could be true in other areas as well, is design is very predictable. And one of the reasons some of the products that we're importing are so successful, of course there's the intrinsic quality, but there's no question that packaging design and the image and the lifestyle and the whole aura of British food and what's behind those specific brands and the brand stories, Japanese can relate to. So I think that's a big area of opportunity.
And a different kind of design aesthetic, I think, is again, before we came on the line, we were just talking about the fact that, you know, a British product might stand out just by virtue of the kind of the way you come at it, and therefore be kind of instantly recognisable on the shelves.
For sure, and actually we play on that when we talk to, and thankfully we don't have to say too much. I'm thinking of a presentation I had yesterday with a retailer who has, it was a lifestyle store again, because the whole lifestyle area is really developing, and it makes sense that they want these kind of products. They don't want just food, they want lifestyle food. And we had the products there, we showed it to them, and you know, they were saying, oh yes, that will look really nice on the shelf and that will look attractive. So bringing those kind of products with the right design helps to make their stores look more attractive to the customers.
Okay, so I think from the look of the live questions as they're flying through, we've got quite a lot of people who are persuaded that there's a market opportunity here, and they do want to dive into kind of more specific things, particularly on that theme of quality that was obviously absolutely consistently throughout your presentation, and also on the regulatory side. So let me dive in for a few of those. We talk about health. What about things like gluten-free market? Is that something that can work in Japan?
My simple answer to that is it's still very, very niche, very small in Japan. I've heard a lot of people talk about it. You'll find it in some of the, especially the high-end supermarkets where especially foreigners go. But at the moment it is still very niche. I mean, organic is still niche. Just to touch on that point, organic is at the moment only approximately 0.5% of the food market, whereas in the UK it's about 3 or 4%. Fair trade is further back from that. Gluten-free is also further back from that. So it's not a short-term big potential. But if someone's happy to have, you know, a small amount of business in that area,
But is the takeaway from that those areas like organic have a lot of growth potential, or that they're always going to remain a kind of niche area?
Well, organic, obviously we feel, because that's what we're focused on, does have big potential. We hope eventually it'll reach 2, 3, 4% of the market. What will hold it back more in Japan than in other countries is the fact that there's not a lot of local offering. So it means by definition most of the food in that sector is then more expensive. And the same is true, I would say, for gluten-free and those various other niches that come along. So again, it depends on expectations. If they want multi-million pound business, then they'll be disappointed. But if someone's happy to get a smaller amount of business and that's their area, then that there's something to go for.
Thank
And
you.
especially if gluten-free isn't the only selling point.
Right.
It's just like we make sure organic is not the only selling point.
Oh, really?
You want the taste, you want the quality, you want the image,
Yep.
and if that's one of the benefits, that makes it a better chance for success.
Understood. You know, some of the things you talked about, obviously the costs of the importation, the fact that the quality threshold has to be very high, potentially you're paying tariffs when you come in here. I mean, that might be causing some concern in people's mind that their profit margin is going to get very seriously eroded. So I think we're duty bound to talk about pricing. You know, are Japanese consumers ready to pay more for things in Japan? Is it more complicated than that?
It is more complicated. It really depends on the product, I would say, especially, and its unique selling points. There are certain product categories. If a product's going to be consumed in one go, like you buy something and you eat it and it's gone, then that will be more price sensitive. If it's a product, and I will give the example, like tea bags, you know, and they're using some of them might be drinking 5 cups of tea a day, who knows, but certain categories are less price sensitive. So that's the short answer.
Right.
It really depends on the product and your whole offering.
Okay, makes sense. Quite a specific question here about quality being an important factor. Do premium supermarkets seek certification for things such as SALSA or BRC?
The short answer again is it depends on the customer, and for sure you will need to have all those certificates ready, and you will need to answer a lot of very specific questions for certain customers.
Mm-hmm.
And more often than not, we're asking questions where the supplier is saying, "Oh, really, is that necessary?" And I'll say, "Yes, it is, if
Right.
you want to get the business." And in the end, thankfully, we get the information.
Yep.
And generally speaking, it is safe
Yep.
to have that information available and to provide to the customers. They just want to know.
Yep. No, I think we're hearing you loud and clear on that. What's your view on kind of natural food? So the free from movement, if you like, in the UK, does that have an appeal in the Japanese market?
Again, it won't be shouted out in the same way as it is in the UK. You know, the free from this. But generally speaking, Japanese will look on the labels and they will be happier to see as few additives as possible. So it's
Right.
gone already very far in Japan, to be
Yeah.
honest. So that is important.
Okay, thank you. We've got a customer who sent a question before the webinar, actually. I was told about a sugar tax on imports. Can you explain a little bit more about this? I believe it's levied on products carrying a certain percentage.
What I can say is that the sugar lobby is extremely strong in Japan. So yes, there tend to be higher import duty rates for products containing sugar. And I can only say that some of the products that we sell, and I know that candy is 25% actually, for example, and a lot of products that we deal with, which have sugar, can tend to be between, if you're lucky, 20% and up to 30% or so import duty. So it is a big issue.
It's an issue. Here's a question incredibly close to my heart, because the embassy has been running a campaign about British food over the last year. I mean, it is true to say that, first of all, the Japanese are crazy about kind of cuisine and food culture. In fact, we should have made that point maybe more strongly at the beginning. I mean, there is an obsession about it. I believe more Michelin stars in Tokyo than London, Paris, Milan combined, you know, more restaurants per capita than anywhere else in the world. And yet, you know, the UK's image here is not necessarily that positive. So people think of France, of Italy as great cuisines. How much is that an issue for people who have individual products? Do they have to worry about positioning themselves as British, not British? What do you think?
Again, I guess it depends on the product, but I mean, you know, British food does do pretty well, I think, in Japan. The ones which tend to do best, of course, are those that have a British heritage.
Right.
So, you know, and some the examples are shown on the picture there. I mean, you've got the shortbread cookies, you've got the tea, you've got the jams. There's quite a lot of British food that will be very well associated with the British image and will do well.
Right.
But there are some examples of other categories where, you know, they've managed to succeed without having that same level of heritage. But,
Right.
you know, it's true. I mean, Britain is not France or Italy or anything else, but it doesn't have to be.
Right.
You know, it has got its own unique selling points.
So the sort of heritage and the backstory about an industry is useful for you. If you're operating in a very sort of contemporary food area, I mean, is Jamie Oliver famous here? Do people know what's going on in terms of restaurants in the UK and how things have changed?
I don't have an absolute answer on that, but I would guess quite a few of them do know it. I mean, the Japanese are very knowledgeable about a lot of things.
Yeah.
And with all the food programs that they have, I would guess that quite a few of them would be familiar with Jamie Oliver.
Yeah.
And quite familiar with quite a lot of the food culture in England and other parts of the world.
To reassure taxpayers watching, we have been spending an incredible large amount of time trying to improve upon that image, and we think we're making progress there. Okay, I think we're nearing the end of the broadcast. In fact, we're officially over our sort of 45 minutes slot. I mean, that's a great thing because we've had so many questions, and I think the information you've given has been super helpful. Why don't we try and summarise with a sort of call to action to all the people watching? I mean, if you could kind of pick out maybe a few categories that you think might be really have potential, or a few themes, a few sort of packaging areas maybe that you've seen that you think really appeal to the Japanese aesthetic, where does real opportunity lie?
I wish I could give you the magic answer for that, and that would be wonderful news, I guess, for some of the people watching, and maybe horrible news for others. But I would say that actually the picture, again, I keep coming back to the picture. If you look at the picture there, you see there you have examples of products that have been successful. There is no one simple answer. The bottom line is people will look at those products.
Yeah.
They will be attracted either by British heritage,
Right.
in some cases,
Yeah.
and the heritage part of it can work very strongly.
Yeah.
But equally, they will be very attracted to modernity and something that is more contemporary if it's presented in the right way. So I would say, please get every part of the marketing mix right, and every part of the product, because that's going to be the main part of what's happening in the UK.
Right.
So make sure the product is attractive to the Japanese, the taste is right, that it has a decent potential market, which, by the way, can be one of the two options. It can be already a big market where you're sufficiently different to take a part of that market, or it could be, and I'm looking at one or two areas, it happens not to be a British food, but I'm looking at one or two areas where that particular, and I'll mention it actually, rye bread, the Japanese are eating effectively 60% white toast bread. But I happen to believe that there's a huge potential for more healthy bread options. Now, bringing bread from the UK to Japan may not seem so obvious, but we're actually bringing some long shelf life bread from another country. And the point is, at the moment the market's very small, but I think there's enough benefits in there that can appeal to the Japanese over time. So it's looking for those kind of opportunities. Both have potential. The existing market where you're different, or something which is hardly in the Japanese market, and you say, we want to make that.
So we've got a depth of sophistication amongst consumers, some willingness and curiosity to try things, although, as you mentioned, a loyalty point, it kind of cuts both ways. Maybe you have to work quite hard to get them, and once you've got them, you keep them. We definitely need an end-to-end strategy in terms of the marketing, so think about every aspect. You need a unique selling point, and if there's one thing we must mention again, it's the keyword, isn't it?
The keyword.
The keyword.
And we're not talking about James Bond here.
Right, so quality. Think about quality every time. Well, I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. I've learned, I think, more over the last 45 minutes than I have all in the rest of the day. If you've got any feedback for us, please do send it to info@exporttojapan.co.uk. Thanks again for listening. We're going to post this up online shortly, so there'll be another opportunity to listen back to some of those names. I appreciate we went quite quickly through some of the supermarket names and so forth. And thanks again to Duco for spending time today.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.